Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Have you ever felt invisible in your marriage after decades together? I certainly didn't, until one evening, my husband's boss pulled me aside at a company gala, and what he revealed shattered everything I thought I knew about our 40-year marriage. At 62, I thought my life was set on a predictable path. Mornings tending to my garden, afternoons curled up with a good book, and quiet evenings with my husband Mark as we reminisced about the years we'd spent together. But everything changed in an instant. It all began at a glamorous corporate event hosted by Mark's company. My husband had spent over 30 years climbing the corporate ladder, dedicating himself tirelessly to his career. I'd always been proud of him, attending these events quietly by his side, supporting him in every way I knew. That night, the grand ballroom sparkled under the light of ornate chandeliers, filled with elegantly dressed guests, mingling and laughing over glasses of champagne. Jazz music floated gently in the background, blending with the cheerful chatter. As usual, Mark was quickly swept into discussions with colleagues, leaving me to make polite conversation with the other spouses. Then, unexpectedly, Richard Caldwell, Mark's boss, a man I'd only exchanged brief pleasantries with before, approached me, tall and distinguished with an air of quiet confidence. Richard always seemed somewhat intimidating. "Evelyn, could I have a word with you privately?" His deep voice was soft but serious. Surprised and a bit confused, I nodded politely and followed him down a quiet corridor, away from the ballroom's lively atmosphere. We entered a small lounge, comfortably furnished with plush leather chairs and a gently crackling fireplace. The warmth should have been comforting, yet I felt an unusual tension settle in the air. Richard took a seat across from me, rubbing his palms together slowly, as if carefully selecting his words. Finally, he spoke. "Evelyn, I hope I'm not overstepping, but there's something I've observed over the years. Something important I think you deserve to know." My heartbeat quickened. "Is something wrong with Mark?" Richard shook his head slightly. "No, not exactly. Mark is a good man, a great employee, dedicated and reliable. But Evelyn," he leaned forward gently, holding my gaze steadily, "he doesn't appreciate you the way you deserve." His words landed heavily, sending a shiver down my spine. I felt a surge of defensiveness. I don't understand. Mark has always been a good husband." Richard nodded sympathetically. "I believe that. But ask yourself honestly, Evelyn, when was the last time he truly saw you? Not just as his wife, but as the remarkable woman you are." I opened my mouth, but no words came. My mind raced back through the years, trying to pinpoint when Mark last noticed the little things, the ways I'd tried so hard to make our home warm, to support him quietly in the shadows of his success. Richard's gentle voice broke through my thoughts. "I've watched you stand quietly behind him at these events, Evelyn. You've spent decades giving everything, but does he truly give back?" A lump formed in my throat as his words resonated deeply within me. I struggled to maintain my composure, the realization dawning painfully clear. "You deserve to be seen," Richard concluded softly, sitting back with a small knowing smile. His words echoed in my heart, shaking my very foundation. Had I really become invisible in my own marriage? I sat frozen, unsure of what to say or do next. Richard's words lingered. "You deserve to be seen." What exactly did that mean for me now? And what was I supposed to do about it? Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's honest words changed your entire perspective? Tell me your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happened when I finally confronted Mark. Have you ever realized something about your life that you couldn't simply shake off? That night, driving home from the gala, Richard's words lingered in my thoughts, impossible to ignore. "You deserve to be seen," he had said. The words repeated themselves like a haunting melody as I sat silently beside Mark, who was focused entirely on the dark, winding road ahead. He broke the quiet with his usual question after every event. "Did you have a good time tonight?" It felt automatic, rehearsed. Was he truly curious, or was it merely a habit? I paused, choosing my words carefully. "It was interesting." Mark nodded absently, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Good," he murmured, and the silence returned. At home, Mark followed his usual routine, jacket off, keys on the counter, retreating to his home office to check emails one last time. Standing alone in the kitchen, I felt the echo of emptiness stronger than ever before. For decades, I'd accepted Mark's routines, supported his career, and filled the spaces between with quiet resilience. But now, something within me had shifted. That night, sleep was elusive. As I lay awake, my mind drifted back through countless moments, tiny sacrifices I'd made, small gestures I'd assumed went unnoticed. How long had I been fading quietly into the background, waiting for acknowledgement that never came? The morning brought no relief. As Mark headed to the door, he offered a quick kiss on my cheek. "I'll be home late. Important client meeting." "All right," I replied softly, offering a small smile. Once he was gone, I stood alone, the house silent and echoing Richard's words from the night before. Without fully understanding my actions, I reached for my phone. My heart raced as my fingers dialed a number I'd never imagined calling. Richard picked up on the second ring, his voice filled with gentle surprise. "Evelyn?" I took a deep breath. "Richard, do you have time for coffee this morning?" A pause followed, and then softly he responded, "Of course." An hour later, I was seated across from Richard in a quaint cafe overlooking the lake, the gentle scent of coffee and pastries surrounding us. Autumn leaves drifted gracefully outside, but inside, my nerves fluttered anxiously. Richard looked at me kindly, waiting patiently. "I wasn't sure I'd call," I confessed, stirring my coffee thoughtfully. "But I couldn't stop thinking about what you said last night." He nodded slowly, his expression calm and understanding. "I realized you're right," I continued softly. "I've spent years supporting Mark, focusing on his goals, his career, so long that I don't even know who I am outside of this marriage anymore." Richard leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but certain. I exhaled slowly, suddenly feeling both terrified and exhilarated at the thought. But where do I even start? A gentle smile formed on Richard's lips, one step at a time. His words settled deeply within me. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to consider the possibility of a life beyond Mark's shadow, a life where my desires and dreams were valid, visible, and valued. Later, as I walked out of the cafe, Richard's encouragement filled me with newfound determination. Yet one question still haunted me, now louder than ever. Who was I without my marriage? Have you ever felt lost in someone else's shadow and wondered how to reclaim yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave me your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happened when I finally confronted Mark. The drive home from my meeting with Richard was strangely peaceful, though my heart still carried a heaviness. His words echoed gently within me, both comforting and unsettling. The life I'd known felt distant now, blurred by the growing realization that I'd spent far too many years fading quietly into the background. Back at home, I moved through rooms that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Everything was just as I'd left it, yet everything had changed. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring blankly into space, reflecting on the many small ways I'd built a world around Mark, a world that had become increasingly isolating. The evening arrived quicker than I was prepared for. Mark walked through the door as he always did, dropping his keys onto the counter. Yet tonight, the routine struck me differently, amplifying my new awareness. I watched him silently, searching his familiar face for some acknowledgement of the turmoil within me, some sign he could sense the shift I was experiencing. But Mark simply loosened his tie and sighed deeply. "Long day," he muttered, running his hand over his tired face. "I'm exhausted." Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I softly said, "Mark, can we talk?" He paused, genuinely surprised, finally meeting my gaze. I hesitated briefly, feeling the weight of years pressing down on this one moment. Confusion flickered across his face. Us. What about us? A deep breath steadied my nerves. "I feel invisible, Mark." His eyes widened, bewildered. "Invisible?" My voice trembled slightly, but I pressed forward. "I've spent years supporting your career, our home, your goals. And somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I feel as though I've disappeared, and you haven't even noticed." Mark sat down slowly across from me, rubbing his forehead, visibly shaken. "Where is this coming from?" "It's always been there," I said softly, carefully choosing each word. I just never had the courage to say it out loud. But now, I can't pretend anymore. He stared at me silently, absorbing my words. The kitchen felt unusually cold as a tense silence stretched between us. After what seemed like an eternity, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know you felt this way, Evelyn. Did you ever really wonder?" My voice cracked slightly. "Did you ever look at me and think something might be missing?" His silence spoke volumes, confirming the painful truth I'd known deep down. Mark wasn't cruel or uncaring. He was simply oblivious, caught up in routines and comfort. Perhaps we both had been. "What are you asking of me?" Mark's voice was cautious now, tinged with fear. I'm not sure yet, I admitted quietly, looking directly into his eyes. But something has to change, because I can't continue living as though I don't matter. Mark's face paled slightly, and a realization seemed to slowly dawn upon him, perhaps for the first time, that our marriage had drifted into unspoken discontent. As he looked at me, I glimpsed something I hadn't seen in years, a flash of genuine concern. Neither of us spoke further that evening, each retreating into quiet corners of the home we'd shared for decades, grappling silently with the future that suddenly felt uncertain. As I lay awake again that night, I felt a mixture of fear and cautious hope. I wasn't certain what tomorrow held, or what our marriage might become. But for the first time, I knew one thing clearly. I couldn't fade quietly into the background anymore. The journey ahead was uncertain, but finally, it was mine to navigate. In the days that followed, an uneasy quiet settled over our home. Mark and I moved around each other cautiously, careful not to disturb the fragile balance we'd unintentionally created. Although little had been resolved, everything had undeniably changed. I began filling my days with new activities, determined to find pieces of myself I had long forgotten. I joined a local art class, something I'd always wanted to try, but had put aside years ago. Holding a paintbrush for the first time was both thrilling and intimidating, but each stroke felt like reclaiming a small part of myself. I started attending a book club at the local library, and even ventured to yoga classes in the neighborhood. Every experience, every new interaction, brought fresh air into a life that had felt suffocated by routines and expectations. Mark began to notice these changes, but he didn't speak of them immediately. Instead, he quietly observed, his usual confidence replaced by subtle confusion. One evening, as I prepared to leave for my art class, I noticed him watching from the doorway. "Another class tonight?" he asked cautiously, clearly uncertain how to approach me. "Yes," I replied, trying to sound confident and casual. "It's been wonderful to finally explore something I've always wanted to do." He nodded slowly, thoughtfully. "You've never mentioned wanting to paint before." I hesitated briefly, then softly responded, "Maybe you never really asked." He blinked, clearly stung by the simple truth in my words. A tense silence hung between us until he finally stepped closer, his voice gentle and uncertain. "Evelyn, do you feel happier now, with these new things you're doing?" I paused, carefully considering his question. "I feel alive, Mark. I feel as if I'm finally discovering who I really am, but it doesn't mean I'm happier without you. It just means I'm finally learning to be happy with myself." He stood there quietly, absorbing the meaning behind my words. I noticed vulnerability in his expression that I'd rarely seen before. "I'm afraid I've lost you," he finally confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. His honesty surprised me, drawing me closer to him. "You haven't lost me yet," I assured him gently, "but things can't stay the same. We both need to change if we're going to keep this marriage alive." Mark looked at me with a mixture of sadness and determination. "For starters, see me," I said softly. "Really see me, not as your support system, not just as your wife, but as Evelyn." Mark reached out carefully, gently holding my hand, an intimate gesture we hadn't shared in years. "I'll try," he whispered. "I promise I'll try." In that quiet moment, hope flickered between us, fragile yet real. We both knew there were no easy fixes, but maybe acknowledging the truth was the first step toward healing. That night, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with lingering uncertainty. The path ahead remained unclear, but at least now we were both willing to face it together. Gradually, our conversations began to shift. Each dialogue became less about routine and obligation and more about rediscovering each other. Though awkward and hesitant at first, Mark made sincere efforts, small gestures that spoke louder than words ever could. He began asking about my day and genuinely listened, noticing when I brought home a new canvas from my art class or finished reading a new novel from the book club. Yet, the process wasn't without difficulty. Sometimes old habits returned, making us stumble over words or retreat into silence. The difference now was that we were both aware of it, acknowledging these moments instead of quietly pretending they didn't exist. One evening after dinner, Mark surprised me. "Evelyn, would you like to go for a walk with me?" It was such a simple request, yet it filled me with cautious optimism. We walked slowly around our neighborhood, the leaves rustling gently beneath our feet, the crisp evening air hinting at autumn's arrival. After several minutes of comfortable silence, Mark finally spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've said," he began quietly. "All these years, I thought being a good husband meant working hard, providing a stable life. I assumed we were both happy." I listened, appreciating his honesty. "We were comfortable," I admitted gently. "But comfortable isn't always the same as happy." He stopped walking, looking at me closely, vulnerability evident in his eyes. "What does happiness look like for you, Evelyn?" The sincerity of his question touched me deeply. "I'm not entirely sure yet," I admitted. "But I do know it's about feeling seen and valued, not just as your wife, but as myself. It's about knowing that my desires and dreams matter." Mark nodded slowly. "I've been afraid to admit how little I actually know about you, beyond our roles and routines. I want to know you again, truly know you." My heart softened at his honesty, and I reached out, gently taking his hand. "Then let's do that. Let's start over, not from the beginning, but from where we are right now. Let's get to know each other again." We walked home hand in hand, quietly feeling the warmth and cautious hope that had returned between us. That night, as we sat quietly together, Mark suddenly rose, retrieving a small photo album tucked away on a shelf we rarely touched. Sitting beside me, he gently opened it, revealing photos from the early days of our marriage. We laughed softly at our younger selves, recalling dreams we'd once shared, dreams we'd once shared, dreams we'd slowly forgotten along the way. Looking at the photos, Mark gently squeezed my hand. "Maybe it's not about going back to who we were, Evelyn, but about who we can still become." I smiled softly, understanding exactly what he meant. For the first time in years, I felt a real sense of hope, not just for myself, but for both of us. Our marriage would never return to what it was before, yet, perhaps, we were now building something even stronger, A relationship built not on convenience or habit, but on genuine understanding and mutual respect. As we closed the album, I knew we still had work ahead, but for the first time in decades, I felt confident we could truly face it together. Over the following weeks, our marriage entered a new phase, one filled with small yet powerful acts of rediscovery. Mark took genuine interest in my art, sometimes quietly watching from the doorway as I painted. I began listening to him share not just his workdays, but his deeper thoughts and worries, discovering sides of him I'd never truly known. We found ourselves speaking openly about dreams we'd abandoned years ago, realizing that the paths we'd chosen didn't need to define our future. For the first time in decades, our conversations felt fresh and meaningful, as though we were getting acquainted again, this time as equal partners, fully visible to each other. One evening, Mark came home with something unexpected. He handed me a beautifully wrapped package, a gentle, nervous smile on his face. Surprised, I carefully unwrapped it, revealing a beautiful leather-bound journal. "I thought," he began softly, "maybe you'd like to write down your thoughts, your dreams, everything you've discovered about yourself lately. I want you to know that I'm here, listening, and I'm ready to support you." Emotion rose warmly in my chest as I held the journal, recognizing the profound sincerity in his gesture. "Thank you, Mark. This means more than you know." He gently took my hand, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I realize now how unfair I've been. You've always stood by me, Evelyn, silently supporting me, but I promise from now on, we stand side by side, together." Over the coming months, our lives transformed. We began to travel, exploring places we'd only talked about years ago. We shared new experiences, sometimes uncomfortable, but always rewarding. Most importantly, we kept communicating, listening deeply to each other's needs, fears, and hopes. One peaceful evening, sitting on our porch beneath a softly glowing sky, Mark spoke thoughtfully. "You know, Evelyn, I never thought it was possible to rediscover someone you've loved for 40 years, but here we are, happier and closer than we've ever been." I smiled softly, leaning gently against his shoulder. Maybe it's because we finally see each other clearly. Flaws, strengths, dreams, everything. It took a long time, but we're finally here. He squeezed my hand affectionately. "I'm grateful every day that Richard spoke to you that night. Without his honesty, I might have never realized what I was losing." I nodded quietly, reflecting. Richard gave us both a gift, the truth. But we chose to listen. And that's why we're here. Mark raised my hand softly to his lips, kissing it gently. In that peaceful moment, surrounded by the quiet beauty of our home, we understood that marriage was never meant to be perfect or effortless. It required courage, honesty, and above all, mutual appreciation and understanding. At 62, I'd learned something invaluable. It's never too late to be truly seen, to rediscover love, and to reclaim your own happiness. Our story wasn't perfect or finished, but we discovered something even more beautiful: the strength to begin again, together.